Now, gender and literacy. This seems to be a fairly interesting topic that's going on, the difference between boys and girls learning. Now, I've heard about the gender gap in literacy, interest, and abilities in school, and as I read the article Boys Literacy Attainment, Research and Related Practice by David Booth, Dr. Susan Elliott-Johns, and Fiona Bruce, it became evident that boys lag significantly behind girls in their literacy motivation and engagement to reading and writing practices. Now, I thought of my own literacy practices when I was in elementary school and could certainly relate to the frustrations that I felt trying to break into the world of reading and writing. And Dr. Booth and Dr. Susie Elliott-Johns placed a summary, or sorry, Dr. Booth, he placed a summary of the notes from our class discussion for all to read, and I found a host of information ideas that I hadn't even considered before. The boys' stigma of reading, it being uncool, by Brozo 2005 and Yashimita 2003, that all boys should not be grouped together in a singular style approach to literacy by Hamill and Strafford. That boys read for different reasons, for entertainment, escape, information, etc. That boys prefer nonfiction, and image can play a large engagement factor. Certainly one of the most profound and yet perhaps obvious comments was that a teacher should get to know their students, both male and female, in order to access student interest and perpetuate engagement. And the easiest way in which to do this was to simply ask the students what they're interested in. Now, I was working in a northern community up in Nunavut at the time of this discussion, and had the students that I was working with complete a small survey of what they want to learn about. And certainly I found out that the boys were more into techno-based answers involving video games and action scenarios, and the girls were into gentler interests, specifically of rainbows, flowers, and Hannah Montana. There was a comment, number 12 on Dr. Booth's posting, that suggested that we need to allow differences between boys and girls, and further suggested the idea of using different strategies between boys and girls to boost confidence in reading and writing. Now, I have very little exposure to differentiating such strategies, and I wondered about the strategies and could I use this in a northern classroom that I found myself in. Well, these students were early learners and still need to develop the skills to read and write functionally. Most were struggling with both reading and writing practices. So I was wondering how I could help both the boys and girls to motivate themselves for continual literacy engagement and exploration. Well, there was a lady by the name of Catherine Snow, a professor at Harvard graduate, or a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'm quoting her in point number 6 that Dr. Booth put up. To the extent that there are gaps in ability, find the appropriate intervention program, and to the extent that there are gaps in the interest without gaps in ability, then you have to address it from a totally different point of view, through motivation and different activities and approaches to teachings. Now, I was interested in the intervention programs. When I asked my group in the discussion threads if they knew if there was any that I could access information about, they admitted to having very limited experience themselves, and so there was no concrete there, so that's something that I'm going to have to explore further in my own practice. Now, what I learned from the gender gap is that there are differences in the way boys and girls engage with literacies. The image of the male reader is one that I need to model personally and foster in the classroom. The image of the cool James Dean-like person flipping through an array of magazines, video game reviews, non-fiction materials, whatever is of interest to the students that comes to mind. Literacy is meaning-making and is cool, and making that connection to the male student especially would go a long way, I think, into promoting active engagement. As a continuation of this discussion, our group was asked to create a mind map. Now, I found the mind map a phenomenal tool to use here. Now, our exploration from gender issues was included in the mind map that we made to collect and see if relationships between new literacies issues found themselves into our classroom today. Now, the mind map was a wonderful exercise that pictorially represented the main issues of concerns that we had been discussing in the class. It was relatively easy to create, and the more I found, the more themes I was able to connect to each theme in greater and greater detail. So you can see from this example, which I'm attaching onto the Prezi, a teacher must consider a wealth of possibilities when selecting the right material for students. What technology, if any, should be used, how the students are going to access the information they need, is there a division or bridge made between the academic success and the enjoyment that the students are going to be feeling? How are we to teach boys and girls differently in meaningful ways? And how can we integrate student choice into the process of learning? How can we teach literary skills to meet the roles of our students that they're going to be playing in the future? Now, well, certainly there's no given one particular framework or panacea for such considerations, but instead I think that the answer exists in a dynamic process of experimentation, reflection, and continuous exploration as new forms of literacy emerge and as you do trial and error within your class. Through the use of a mind map, I was able to start to see these patterns emerging, a phenomena that was reported to not just me, but by, as Dr. Booth pointed out, as we try, and this is quoting from his post on our discussion post, as we try to frame our thoughts graphically, we often see a new pattern of understanding. These are more than summaries, as a TV guide plot outlined. They distill our experience and allow us to reflect the middle of the process. And personally, well, I couldn't agree more.